Hi everyone, my name is Steve, and today I'm going to be starting on a new PC build project that I've had in the plans for some time. It's going to be themed after D.Va, the character from Overwatch. In this series, we're going to be building a powerhouse system for gaming, video editing, programming, streaming, virtual machines, and all sorts of things, all based around AMD's Ryzen CPU platform. And we'll be doing some painting of the case, and maybe even some of the components inside, as well as doing a full custom water cooling loop. I've never done anything like this. No custom painting, no water cooling loop, nothing. All of this stuff is going into this case that you see behind me, the Be Quiet Dark Base Pro 900. I've loved this case since the first time I saw it. It's big, it's roomy, it's focused on high performance in a quiet environment, but one of my favorite features about this case is that it is invertible. You can flip everything in this case around to face the other side. And that's how I'm planning to run this machine, which is going to be sitting on the left side of my desk. The case is in its factory configuration right now. In today's build log, we'll be inverting everything inside the system so that the motherboard tray is on the left, glass is on the right. When working in this case, I highly recommend the use of nitrile gloves, as this case is a fingerprint magnet. Remove the 4 thumb screws holding the glass side panel on. Lift the glass side panel off of its pegs, but be careful as there's not a whole lot of room for your fingers to grab it on the right side. Loosen the 2 thumb screws and remove the back side panel. Next we're going to remove the front panel, but to do that we need to get rid of the dust filters that are in our way. So open the door and remove the dust filter in the front, followed by the long one across the bottom. You have to do this or it will jam when you try to remove the front panel. There are 8 plastic tabs, 4 on each side, that you need to push in order to separate the front panel from the rest of the chassis. With the front panel off, we can now invert the door. Start by removing the 2 screws that hold the door to the door frame. Once this is done, give the door a little wiggle and it should separate easily from the hinge. On the other side of the door are 2 pieces of plastic that hold magnets that are responsible for holding the door closed. Undo these screws, use your fingers to flip the mechanism out, turn it around and place it on the other side. Then screw it back into the door. At the top of the door is a little spring-loaded mechanism thingy that's used to push the door open with your finger. When it's closed, just push it in, take it out, drop it in on the other side, and you're good to go. On each side of the door are 2 mechanisms, one to hold the hinge in place, and one to hold the magnets that keep the door closed. There are 2 parts to this, one up top and one up bottom for each side. We need to undo the screws for all 4 of those, so we can swap them. Once the screws are out, you can lift the mechanisms out with your fingers. Make a note of which side the magnets came out on so that you can make sure to get them on the right side when you put them back in later. Then you can remove the other side, which has the mechanisms for the hinge. Do this on both the top and bottom. Now we can insert the hinge back into the door on the other side. This is a particularly complicated step, so here's an example showing how it works. The sleeve holds the arm pinned against the side of the frame. The arm sits in between the sleeve and the frame and can swing freely. The sleeve goes in through the bottom and the arm goes in through the top. This will take some time to get right. You'll probably mess up a couple times, I know I did. This isn't the easiest thing to be able to get on video, so I do apologize for that, but once you get it, you'll know, and then you just screw down the 2 parts just like you unscrewed them before. Once you're done with the hinge, you can drop in the plastic parts that have the magnets, silver part facing away from the door, then screw those in. You need to get both top and bottom for both the hinge and the magnets. You can then screw the door onto the frame, and the front panel is finally done. Now you don't have to remove the bottom panel in order to invert the case, but I did find it makes it way easier. To remove the bottom panel, there are 2 screws that you have to undo in the foot of the case, then slide the chassis back and remove it from the bottom panel. Like the front, the top panel uses plastic tabs that you push in and then lift off of the case. Take this opportunity now to unsnake some of the cables that go to the front control panel around through the chassis and out through the top. Time for the drive bays. Each one has 3 captive thumb screws that can be undone, and when they are loose, the entire drive bay will slide right out. You may not have to do this to invert it, but it will get in the way later. We're now going to remove the motherboard tray, which is highlighted by 9 screws that have these outlined rubber grommets around them. They are located with 6 along the back, as you see here, along with 3 down the front on the side of the case. This is what holds them all in place, and we need to undo all of these screws in order to remove the motherboard tray from the case. But be careful, because once you undo a few screws, it's going to start putting some stresses on some of the other screws, so you may want to use your hand to give it some extra balance while you finish off those last few screws. Once it's done, you can slide the entire motherboard tray out through the back and just set it aside for now. Now we'll remove the metal structure that holds in the drive bays. There are 6 screws along the side of the case that hold it in place, along with 4 in the front. You can undo these screws in any order. The piece of metal just balances itself along the foot of the case and in a little groove that is holding the front in place. Once you get the 6 along the side, there are 4 in the front. Once you remove all 10 screws, you can slide the metal frame back and it will slide right out of the case. There may be a little bit of resistance as you kind of pull it out. You may have to twist it a little bit, but it should come out no problem. Now in the foot of the case, there's a power supply extension along with some mesh covers that we're going to remove and rotate. They're blocked by these screws on each side of the case. The top 2 cover the mesh coverings, which can be moved up top if you want. The bottom 2 cover the power supply extension cable. Remove all 4 of these screws on both sides, and then you'll be able to just slide them out with your finger and pop them back in. We need to take the bottom one and rotate it 180 degrees so that it's facing the other way. And the reason for this is so that the extension cable can be snaked back to the power supply the way that it's supposed to sit. Once it's done, you can take the mesh covers and slot them right back in, and they will just fit right back in. Then use screws to reattach them. You can also take the mesh and put it up towards the top of the case if you want, and there are screw holes to accommodate them. Once that's done, you can move the power supply holder by undoing these 4 screws in the bottom of the chassis. There are also 2 along the side. Loosen all 6 of those screws and you'll be able to move the power supply tray. Once that's done, you can slide the power supply tray over to the other side. Don't worry too much about the orientation of the extension cable. That'll be something that you concern yourself with a bit more once you are actually connecting the actual power supply into the system. Which might be at this step, it's up to you really. Just make sure you get all 4 of those screws. Once you're done, you can slide it back. You'll feel it kind of click a little bit, and then that will let you reattach the 2 screws that go into the side, which properly secure it. You can now screw the power supply extension back into the chassis along with the mesh extensions up top, but be very careful when you reconnect those ones up top. The screw has a tendency to fall into the metal of the chassis and drop, and that creates a huge headache for you. I highly recommend cranking those by hand to get started. After that, you can move the pegs that the glass side panel sits on simply by unscrewing them and screwing them into the holes on the other side. These can be a little tricky, especially if you're not wearing gloves, because the sides of those screws are pretty sharp. Be very careful if you need to use a screwdriver or pliers, because the metal can actually break on the screw. making it really hard to get the thumb screws on and off or move them later, so just be careful of that. But move all 4 thumb screws over to the other side. Once that's done, you can pop the drive cage tray back in. Take the piece and just kind of slide it in, and you will feel it click once it's lined up against the door. Then put those 10 screws back in, 3 along the top side, 3 along the bottom side, and 4 along the front. Just in any order that you want, just make sure that they all get in and secured nice and tight. If you've got spinning disc hard drives, remember this is what it's going to be holding up against, so make sure that these screws especially are tight. There are 3 rubber grommets that need to be taken out of the side of the case and moved to the other side. Just remove them with your thumb and stick them in the appropriate place on the other side of the case. The motherboard tray is ready to go back in, this time upside down and on the other side of the case. Line up the rubber grommets on the left side with the holes on the left side depending on which height you want it at. There are also corresponding holes on the right side that match up to the hard drive bay cage. Once that's done, screw in the 6 screws on the back side of the motherboard tray. You may have to wiggle it a little bit to get the holes to line up right. I tend to do a diagonal pattern first and then fill in the rest of the screws as you go along. Once the 6 screws on the back are done, screw in the 3 on the front, and the motherboard tray should be properly secured. This is a great time to start snaking those cables back through. There is a hole in the top of the chassis to snake cables through, along with a hole on the back side of the motherboard tray. It's really important that all of the cables get fed through this way. Otherwise, the top cover won't go back on, and the cables won't be routed properly so that they can be snaked through the rubber grommets later on. Can have their cables routed through these little cutouts in the hard drive cage. This is a great way of getting your cables back to the fan controller on the back of the motherboard tray. If you want to install the hard drive bays, this is probably a good time to do it. Just reinsert them and tighten down the 3 thumb screws. The top of the case is ready to go back on, so just lift it on top, make sure the plastic tabs are aligned, and squeeze it down with your hands. The bottom of the case is ready to be put back on. I found it easiest to do this upside down. Just drop it on, make sure the tabs line up, slide the bottom of the case forward, and that's all set. Then flip it over, get those 2 little screws back put in place, and tie them down so that the bottom of the case is secure. Just like the top, the front just snaps into place. Make sure those plastic tabs are aligned on both sides, and then squeeze it with your hands until the front of the case is fully secured to the back. Once the front panel is in place, you can then reinstall the dust filter that goes along the bottom of the case. There may be a little bit of resistance, but it should slide in pretty easily. Once the bottom filter is in place, then add the front filter. We are almost done inverting this case, but there's still one thing left we have to do, and that is to invert the logo that goes on the side panel. It uses plastic tabs just like the top panel and the front panel do, so give them a squeeze until they kind of slide in, and wiggle it around until the front panel just kind of comes loose and pops off. Then you can flip it upside down, reinstall it, squeeze those plastic clips back into place, and the side panel is now ready to go in its new upside down configuration. Now all it's left to do is to reinstall the back side panel, secure it to the back of the case with the 2 thumb screws, then flip it around, install the glass side panel, secure it down with 4 thumb screws, and you are done. You have fully inverted the Be Quiet Dark Base Pro 900. So there you have it, the inverted layout of the Be Quiet Dark Base Pro 900. This was a pretty straightforward process, although it certainly had its headaches along the way. It does take quite a bit of time to invert. I was a little surprised with how long it took me. I think it took me probably 2-3 hours the first time that I tried to put this together, which was a little on the long side. Most of the problems came down to figuring out which screws to pull out and what order to take everything out in, and making sure to find all the little hidden screws that were in every little nook and cranny of the thing. That's part of the reason I wanted to make this video, was to make it possible for other people to learn how to do this. You could see exactly where, or hopefully exactly where the screws are, what order you got to take everything out in, what needs to come out and what doesn't need to come out. So overall the inversion process was pretty straightforward, but there were definitely a couple places where there were some hang-ups along the way. If you notice the long screws that go into the power supply extension, that mesh in the bottom, on more than one occasion, I ended up actually dropping that screw into the metal shaft that goes along the corners of the case. And it ended up being a pretty difficult process to get those out. You usually have to stick in some kind of metal pin or screwdriver or something all the way through and shake the case around in hopes that you can catch it and kind of get it to fall out. And that was a big pain, and that happened to me on a couple occasions. So when you invert in this case, if you try to do that, be very mindful of those screws and make sure that they are all the way through before you do it. Don't rely on your screwdriver's magnetic tip. The way that I got through it was to start cranking it by hand and then use the screwdriver to take it all the way home. So I would be very careful of that. Another place that I had a problem was with all of the little cables that ran through the body of the case. And what ended up happening the first time I put this case back together in an inverted layout was one of the cables, one of those tiny little cables that has a header for the motherboard, it actually fell through the fan grill at the bottom of the case. And when I went to go put the fan filter back in there, I didn't notice that had happened because the inside is so dark. And as a result, I put the fan filter in and it dragged the header along with it. And it actually got really stuck in there, and it took a lot of time to get. I was worried I was going to pull the header right off of the pin. Fortunately, that didn't happen, but it was something to be considered of as you put the case back together. But all in all, it was a pretty straightforward thing to build in. You may have noticed as I was putting it back together that the front of the door did not go back on. And there's a reason for that, and that's going to be made clearer when you watch the following videos, because there's some special customization being done to it. It can only be done right now when I'm recording this video because of scheduling conflicts, so there will be something really cool in the finale that you'll be able to check out. So do make sure that you're subscribed so you can see the rest of the videos of this build. We're going to be starting the next video actually doing the build. We're going to put in the motherboard, the CPU, start some of the water cooling loop stuff. We're going to reuse some of the old graphics cards at first, but we'll get there in time with some really heavy-duty graphics cards. This is going to be a real special video series, so please make sure you're subscribed. If you did like this video, please drop a like down below, and tell me what you think in the comments box about running an inverted layout, and if that would be something that would consider you in the future. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care.